What's the largest cultural difference you noticed as an Italian living in America?
I would say straightforwardness. We have no problem expressing how we feel at all times. And sometimes that can be perceived even as rude. Here in the United States, there's always like a layer of courtesy. Of course, it's not the UK either, but I still can perceive that Anglo-Saxon background, which in our Latin culture we really lack. We tell the truth,
Even when someone doesn't want to hear it.
especially when someone doesn't want to hear it.
This is Italian for Sure, the podcast about Italian culture. I'm your host, Catrin, an American living in Italy, and I interview Italians who passionately share their wisdom, stories, and insights about Italian culture. Welcome to Italian for Sure, Michele.
Thank you for having me, Catrin. It's a great honor for me.
Well, I'm excited to chat with you about a variety of things, including true crime in Italy, which will be a first on the podcast, cultural shocks you've had as an Italian now living in Italy, and then specifically the differences between going to school in Italy versus the US. But first, could you start by introducing yourself and tell us where in Italy you're from?
Of course. So my name is Michele D'Innella, and I'm originally from Bari. It's a city in southern Italy. Some of you might know it. It's becoming a little bit more touristy in the last few years. But in general, the south is the part of Italy that Americans and tourists in general know the least. And I always say to them that they're missing out on so much because I might be biased, but it's probably one of the best places to visit in Italy. I did law school there. I did my entire education in my hometown in Bari. And then I decided that I wanted to do my master's abroad. And I decided to choose Washington, D.C. as the destination because I wanted to be involved in nonprofit work, and I knew this was the mecca for organizations like that, and I would have had a chance to make that kind of difference. And so I decided to apply for a few universities, and I got in at the George Washington University, and I moved here in August 2022, fresh out of law school. I graduated from that at the end of June, and I was here at the start of August that year. So you can imagine the shock that brings. Of course, I had been to the United States before, but living here is something completely different, and I believe we'll have a chance to talk about it in our conversation today.
Absolutely. Living somewhere is definitely different than visiting. But I didn't know that you went in August of 2022. It's actually when I moved from the US to Italy. So our planes must have been crossing.
Yeah, there is something there for sure.
Well, Bari, where you're from, the region of Puglia, which is like the heel of what we call the boot of Italy, is a region that I went very briefly just into the airport, basically, and in the very center of Bari. But I would love to explore that region. I've heard wonderful things about it. And so now you're in DC and you went there for law school. So you have experience going to higher education, both in Italy and also in the US. Can you tell me what are the largest cultural differences you noticed going to school in Italy versus the US?
Studying in Italy and studying here in the United States. In general, I would say it's about the approach. It's much more proactive here. The way professors teach, they like to interact with their classes. The classes are much smaller, but of course, it all originates from the fact that most schools, even the best ones in Italy, are public. And especially law school is usually open to anyone, and there's no entry test for some faculties, while it's a lot more exclusive to go to law school here in the United States, especially if you're going to a private school like the one where I did my master's. So that already sets a bar that is very high, and the classes are much smaller than the ones that you will find in Italy, in my country of origin. And so it's by design that the professors won't have that much of a chance to interact with each of their single individual students. And that's really a pity, in my opinion, because you can get a lot from that one-to-one relationship. At least that's what happened to me during my master's here in DC. I became friends with most of my professors. Some of them we are still friends with. Some of them became my references for future jobs that I applied for. And that's I believe that's great, because also the age gap is not that big compared to the one that we had in Italy. Doing my master's here, I was kind of undercover, I would say, because I started when I was 26, turning 27, and I was in class with some American kids that were still in law school, and they were 21, 22, 23. And so being a bit more grown up than them helped me establish that direct relationship with those professors that I had. And that was such a great experience, in my opinion, because you get to see school from a different perspective. When you go to school for the first time, you are always anxious, you're always thinking about your deadlines and about your finals. While I really believe that doing your master's in the United States helps you enjoying that experience, enjoying the atmosphere of an American university. And that's something that I consider a privilege personally.
Very positive thinking. I've heard some horror stories about school in Italy, I guess before the age of, say, 18, where in schools in Italy, there are these pop oral tests. And I have talked to some Italians where they still have nightmares that they're called up to the front of the class and they have to answer some questions about the lesson of the day before. Do you have experience with this? Is this true? Is this how it is in Italian schools when you're younger?
We call them interrogazioni, which translated into English, I understand that it might sound a bit intimidating.
Interrogations.
Yeah. What I can tell you is that it's not as scary as it looks. Most times these interrogations, we call it like that, it's funny, are scheduled. So your professor will be like, okay, tomorrow I will call on someone, and you guys have the chance to come up with one or two volunteers, so that you have to be interrogated just a couple times every year. And so, it's like getting your flu shot. You just decide to do it, you book your appointment, and you do it, and it turns out fine. I personally loved it. I loved it way more than a written test, because there's so many ways to get away with it, even if you didn't study that much. I understand that from an American's perspective, it could be actually intimidating, but you have to understand that in Italy, we are much more comfortable with actually speaking to people. And that's also one of the many reasons why I decided to become a professional podcaster, because just by using your voice and your body language, it's a direct and powerful tool to reach out to people and to make them really resonate with whatever you're saying and with the core message. So having been educated like that for sure helped me develop my personality as a podcaster and as a lawyer, which we'll have a chance to touch upon. Because something that you have to know is that there is no written exam in law school in Italy. You have around 30 to 35 exams in total in the course of 5 years. And I would say only one or two of them are written. And
that could be a really good thing nowadays with AI, because if you have to give an oral exam, you can't really cheat. You have to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and that can be very, very stressful at the same time. I told you, when I came to school here in the United States, I was so surprised to see that most exams in law school in America are open book. And I'm like, you basically give me the cheat codes. I can research whatever I need to research. And that's basically what a lawyer does, what they train you to do, to generally know what you're talking about, generally know the law. But then you have to research into the articles and the cases, and that gives you a huge advantage. So I was a bit skeptical when I saw that, when they told me that for the first time, while I was used to a totally different experience during my time in law school in Italy, because most exams, as I said, are oral.
Well, it sounds very difficult, but you did manage to graduate from both. So congratulations. And I did see on Instagram what you got to wear when you graduated from your school in Italy. And we'll talk about that in a minute. In America, did you have a chance to wear one of those square academic caps that we wear?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I loved it.
Yes. Okay. So I was shocked. This was a cultural shock I had when I was walking around Italy and I saw somebody wearing a green leaf crown with kind of a red ribbon. And I asked somebody Italian, what is that? Why are they wearing that? And they said, well, that's what you wear when you graduate. As an American, these green leaf crowns that people wear when they graduate are beautiful. And compared to the square academic caps that us Americans have to often squeeze onto our heads, and we try to make them pretty by decorating the top, but often most will agree we don't like them. So having experienced both, wearing the square academic cap and the green leaf crown, which do you prefer?
It's a tough choice. Well, I'm going to start from this. As you know, in Europe, in Italy, we grow up with mostly American movies, and we have a very different reality than what you guys portray. It's a completely different experience for us. Universities and college is mostly a place where you go to hear boring lectures and eventually do your exams, and that's it. It's not a place, it's not a campus where you get to actually spend time and play sports and live with your friends. We don't have that, unfortunately, because we live in cities, we live in apartments. We don't have the same spaces that you can find in the United States. And so we grew up with that ideal, and we think it's very cool to do the gaunt and hat thing. And I thought the same. I thought it was very cool until I saw them. First of all, you rent them, and I think it's kind of gross because you don't know who had them before, how many people had them.
I agree.
And then there's one element you have to take into the equation, which is the fact that it's very hot. It's usually at the end of May, and I remember when I did it last year, it was the 21st of May, and the sun was merciless. And then you go into this stadium thing, and you wait until they call your name, you shake hands, you take pictures. We don't have any of that in Italy. We have.
What's graduation like? in Italy?
We have a more compact ceremony, I would say, more simple ceremony, where you defend your thesis for 30 minutes to an hour, along with a few other people that are graduating with you in your class. And then they announce everyone's final vote, which in America would be another big no.
They vote if you graduate or not.
Not only that, there is a graduation vote that goes up to 110. And so everyone gets to hear what people's votes are in the end. So
does it matter what you get? What does that affect afterwards?
It doesn't matter that much.
Do jobs find out what you got scored and care?
Some of them, yes. It's not that big of a deal anymore because the job market is difficult anyway. But yeah, I believe it's also a pride thing for your family, knowing that you got out with the best grades possible. It's more of an achievement, I would say.
Well, Michele, we talked about a lot of cultural differences already, but I want to ask you, now that you've been living in the US for almost 2 years, what's the largest cultural difference you noticed as an Italian living in America?
I would say straightforwardness. We have no problem expressing how we feel at all times. And sometimes that can be perceived even as rude here in the United States. There's always like a layer of courtesy. Of course, it's not the UK either, but I still can perceive that Anglo-Saxon background, which in our Latin culture we really lack. We tell the truth.
Even when someone doesn't want to hear it?
Especially when someone doesn't want to hear it. Especially when you care about someone. I really believe that, and this is how I was brought up, it's in their interest to know if there's something wrong with them, if they could do something a different way. And it's you as a friend or as a family member, as a relative, to let them know. It's basically your job. It's not fun, but you have to sometimes. While here, when you have friends in the United States, it's frowned upon if they feel judged. The question that you hear sometimes is, "Oh, are you judging?" And in Italy, we perceive it in a different way. In Italy, if I'm your friend, I will tell you things straightforward and directly, and it's in your best interest, of course. But I understand that can be that can cause friction sometimes.
Michele, I could not agree with you more. I have said the exact same thing as a cultural difference as an American now living in Italy. I believe that Italians are more direct than Americans. And personally, I really enjoy it. I really like it. It's personal because I am someone who is very direct. To the point where sometimes with my friends, when they've asked for advice in the US, I'll ask first, are you looking for, simply somebody to listen, support just by listening? Or are you looking for me to tell you what I truly feel? Because I have to ask to understand what they're ready to accept. Whereas in Italy, it feels that people are ready to accept. I've even noticed it with the smaller things, such as somebody asking me if I want pizza or I want Roman food. And in America, I might feel like I have to be a little more cautious of the person's feelings and say something like, "Oh, it's okay. What do you want? What do you prefer?" And here I feel way more comfortable saying, the truth, which maybe, I had pizza yesterday. Would you mind if we get Roman tonight? And of course, if they say, actually, no, I really want pizza, then okay, maybe we have pizza. It doesn't matter, but I can actually say what's on my mind and answer the question. But my American side comes out because sometimes I do have like instances where, the closest person to me is my fiance. So he's Italian. He'll say something to me and I'll almost get offended and he'll say, I'm just saying my opinion, or I'm just saying what's on my mind. And then what you do with that information is up to you. And it's so true. And it's having this more direct conversation than having to anticipate what the other person is going to feel and try to protect their feelings. And then sometimes many people lose themselves because they try too much to protect the other person. And instead of just saying what's on their mind, it all gets internalized. So it's a long-winded way of saying I 100% agree with that cultural difference. I've experienced it myself. So I mentioned my fiance is Italian. I believe you're married to an American. What cultural differences have been most prevalent in your relationship?
Well, we have to say that my wife is half American and half Mexican. So that's the part that brings us the closest culturally. So Mexican culture has some similarities to the Italian one. So on most things, we are on the same page. But sometimes her American side comes out very, very strongly. And there are some things like when you're cooking, choosing the best ingredients and I always say that Italian cuisine is about less is more, and using some very basic but high quality ingredients to be able to savory the single ingredients in a dish that you're cooking. And it's a very, very simple, very traditional type of cuisine. While I really believe that when it comes to the American culture, it's about going extra and adding spices and ingredients and as much as you can, just because you have a chance to. So that's something that sometimes we are not on the same page. But she's very willing to learn more about the Italian culture, and she always tells me that she wants to become a fancy Italian lady one day. So I think she's on the right track. She likes fashion very much. She went shopping in Italy with my mom last winter, and oh boy, you don't want to see that happen. Like it's very dangerous. So
for someone's wallet.
Absolutely. When it comes to taking care of yourself in general, Italians like to take it slower and pay more attention to those little details that end up irreversibly making your quality of life better than the average American, especially when you get up to a certain age, a certain point of your life. You can really tell the difference between the average Italian and the average American. And I think you have witnessed that as well in the past.
I mean, one of the things I can equate to that is living in cities versus not. In Italy, it is very common to live in areas where even if you're not in a city and you're in a town, you're walking. I notice that's just the number one way that elderly people that I've seen stay very able and I guess youthful in that way, is that they almost have to be able to walk and carry heavy things because they're still walking to get their groceries and carrying them back. Such a simple thing, but it's how they get food, which is a basic need, which is different than, for example, where I grew up specifically in what Italians have called a countryside. It's Long Island. I don't see it as a countryside like that. I'm not living amongst the cows, no shade to cows, but it's 45 minutes outside of New York City. And so everything that we did, and when I'm back, everything that I do is with a car. So a lot of the day is sitting for work, sitting to get there, sitting to go somewhere else. Then if you're going to a restaurant, you're sitting again. So that's probably the biggest difference or thing I notice when it comes to looking at people who are elder and seeing why maybe I see some differences. But I wonder if I really looked into cities in America, it would be similar. But speaking about, living in cities, because being 45 minutes outside of New York City, and I get this question all the time asked to me by Italians and by people who've never been there, do I feel safe? Now, I know you're not in New York, you're in DC. And I want to know, living in America from Italy, and specifically, you said the south of Italy, southeast of Italy, do you feel more or less safe living in the US?
Definitely less. Even in a city like Washington, D.C., I have to be sincere. Even though I am in a nice neighborhood, I still live in the same area where my school is located. We also have a few government buildings. We have the Department of State just behind my shoulders as I'm speaking. But there's also way more homeless people, unfortunately. And that's something very sad. That's also the first thing that I noticed when I moved to DC. I remember I was on my way to my new home from the airport, and I remember asking my Uber driver why were all those tents there, and he answered just nonchalantly that they were all homeless. And you don't see that often in Italy, apart from maybe big cities like Rome or Milan. And I don't think it gets to be even that bad. So there is a problem again. There would be a lot to unpack even here, as you said. But of course, you know how having people that have nothing on the street can generate more problems, including crime and drug addiction. And sometimes those problems combine together and spiral into things that make a place less safe. And when it comes to my personal experience, I never felt unsafe walking around in Italy. As you said, rightfully, we are big walkers in Italy. We go everywhere by foot, and we loved it. While here, the first few months, but even nowadays, still after 2 years that I've been living here, I sometimes feel and felt unsafe walking alone at night on the street, because you'll know everything is alive in Italy up until at least 11 or 12 in the night, while I think that most cities in America, everything shuts down after 9 or 10 p.m.
You think? Not New York.
Not New York. It's a different place. But to give a general picture, because a lot of Italians think that America is New York.
Right. New York is America.
We want to debunk that.
Yes. Even saying New York, New York is a state that you can drive 6 hours through and you just immediately, people think of New York City.
Yeah, absolutely. But yes, the general answer to your question is I do feel more unsafe here in the United States than in Italy, even just because of the quantity of firearms that are there compared to what we have in my country. You would never expect that you honk at the wrong person while you're driving and they can pull up a gun. So that's scary.
It's true, unfortunately, and it is scary. And I felt it as well when I was in the US. It had gotten to the point where when I would go to movie theaters, I would look for the nearest exit, knowing that there was a possibility that something could happen. I think at the time there was a lot of movie theater shootings. In Italy, the most unsafe that I feel is actually just with my stuff. So I feel there's a higher chance of someone stealing my stuff or getting pickpocketed. I've had, the guys come over to the table, putting the newspaper over the table to try to, pretend that they're asking for something as they're really trying to get your phone. So that's how I always describe how I feel in the differences. In the US, I felt more unsafe for my life and bad things that could happen to me as a person. And in Italy, I feel just more aware of my belongings and the fact that, someone could, steal something or pickpocket something. But it's not that there's pickpocketers on every corner, but I do feel that they're more prevalent than I had felt in the US. So I want to talk about something that you mentioned before. You said that you're a podcast creator. So you're the creator of 9 podcasts. Is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And one of them that I saw, so non spegnere la luce. So believe it means don't turn off the light. And this is a perfect segue because we're talking about crime. And this is a true crime podcast about crimes in Italy. Is that right?
Yes, of course. And that's the original intent of the podcast, to keep shedding a light on things like these and on the various aspects of and the declinations of crime, because it has many. Of course, in Italy, some of you may know that we have a history of organized crime, and it's still a problem. Unfortunately, I believe that America was one of the few countries that were successful at eradicating an entire criminal organizations like the Italian mafia in New York. Most of you, I'm sure, have seen the movie Goodfellas, so you know how it used to.
I haven't, but everyone always is very shocked and says you have to watch it. So, but I know that most have.
It's a beautiful movie, and unfortunately, in Italy, we didn't have the power, both our government and the people, to completely eradicate those organizations, and so they're still thriving after these days. They evolved, of course. They don't look the same as they did in the stereotypes. Now they are in banks. They invest in funds in London or Cyprus, Malta, and that's the scary part, because these Italian criminal organizations in Italy, they delegate to smaller criminal groups from Morocco, from Tunisia, Albania, and other countries like that could be from Northern Africa to Eastern Europe. They delegate to them the dirty part of the work, and that's how you end up having so much more drug selling on the streets, and so much more pickpocketing and smaller robberies. So that's the origin of the problem, and we originally wanted to shed a light on that and to expose some of these mechanisms to the public, and to make people understand what it means, for example, to buy an Apple Watch or a pair of AirPods that have a not so sure origin, just because they're cheaper. So we all somehow contribute to those organizations thriving. And as citizens, the best thing we can do is be aware of these mechanisms and be loud about them and be transparent about them. And of course, in our podcast, we also talk about many other things still related to true crime. Of course, we had some iconic cases. We had our own serial killers in Italy, not as many as in the United States, I have to say. But still, there are some stories that, even if they happened 30 or 40 years ago, They are still talked about a lot, and so we're there to cover all of them.
What's the most mind-blowing crime story that you've talked about on your podcast from Italy?
The murder case, because this British college girl in 2007 that was living in Italy got murdered the night of Halloween. And that was such a big case in Italy, because the media were there, the press, and the protagonists as well. Unfortunately, the involuntary protagonists end up being not so much Meredith herself, the victim, but the people, the suspects, basically. And it was very unfortunate because we had these very young couple, an Italian named Raffaele Sollecito and an American named Amanda Knox, that had been dating for like a week, and they were accused of murdering this girl for some reason, while some other suspects fled to other countries. And in the meantime, the media started putting them to trial without even asking permission, without the investigators even gathering all the pieces. And so I'm sure that you've heard the name Amanda Knox before, and you've heard it because she became, especially on the Italian press, but not limited to that, I have to admit, she became Foxy Knoxy. She became the evil conjurer that misled her Italian fiance into committing a crime like that. And they were both convicted. They both spent some time in prison before actually being acquitted after 10 years of being in the center of the attention of the media, and having their own personal lives unfolded in the eyes of everyone. And what strikes me nowadays is that a person like Amanda Knox, which could have been many, many things in her life, and she's still 34, if I remember correctly, will never get to live a normal life, even if she was deemed to be innocent at the end. And that's life-changing. And again, that's something that is on all of us, because when we talk about a story, when we talk about a case, when we talk about an individual, without fact-checking, without waiting for the investigations to end, we are doing an irreparable damage to that person, and no amount of money can fix that ever, because it will never be the same. Amanda Knox would have to change her name, her identity, to be able to be a normal person again. So that's for sure a case that has struck me, and that has struck many Italians. A lot of people, even though she was acquitted, are still convinced that she was behind the murder of Meredith Kercher. I know that in America it's different, because the American media did a lot of counter narration compared to what was done in Italy. And luckily, we are in a democratic background where we're still able to say what we believe. But there was a huge case in my home country, which became international and which is still talked about up to this day.
Wow. I have to admit, I didn't know about that story. I am kind of scared of listening to true crime podcasts, if I'm being honest. The scariest is cyber true crime and people getting catfished. But thank you for sharing. That is wild. Michele, we covered so many things today, and it's been lovely chatting with you, from cultural differences to hearing about your experience in school, now true crime in Italy, and just our feelings on crime in general, Italy versus the US. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we close out this interview?
Well, I would say keep visiting Italy if you haven't, to all the Americans listening. And to the Italians, I would tell them to go to see America outside of New York City, because it's such a diverse country. It has so much to offer that it's so limiting to think about the entire United States as just that. So my piece of advice, if you want to take it, is to try and get rid of your biases and experience things that are out of your comfort zone, and always have a critical mind. Always ask questions and double check. Let's say double check about every single piece of information that is fed to you.
I love that advice. I love the national parks in my country, in the US, and they're really unique. So if you're into nature, go beyond New York City, check out some national parks. Michele, it's been lovely having you on Italian for Sure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Catrin, for having me. This is Italian for Sure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Italian for Sure. If you liked what you heard, make sure to hit the follow button wherever you listen to podcasts, and hit the subscribe button on YouTube. If you want to connect, find me on Instagram and TikTok at Italian for Sure, and let me know what you found most interesting. Until next time.